Thank you very much. I realize I'm the only person standing between you and the rest of your life, so I'll try to make this brief and not too dreary. First off, 2 years ago, I gave a talk with a similar title here, but my talk today is different somewhat as we've tried to actually better understand the policy changes that may be needed. And many people have talked about that the diverse these early successional ecosystems are rarer than we've had in the past. And we expect that under current policy, except for wildfire, they'll remain rare in the future. And by the way, right now, at least in Oregon's Coast Range, they're mostly being provided by state forest management. We'll see how long that can last. And I've got to say, though, my wife, Debbie, who helped in this talk, is here. Debbie, raise your hand. There. She's down here in front. So anything you don't like about the talk, see Debbie afterwards. Focus on my talk. Okay, what are the policy and management challenges of increasing early successional ecosystems on federal and private lands, the two dominant lands in the state of Oregon? And I'm talking only about the moist forests. Our map, which are blue, Ray has a little bit more in the yellow, but I see the speckle there right in the area he was talking about. So really talking about the blue, the moist forests. And there's three things that could be done in federal lands. First, leave the burned areas alone, or leave the post-disturbance areas alone. And I want to talk a little about the policy shift there. Next, demonstrate regeneration harvest strategies that create diverse early cereal. And then third, emulate large-scale disturbance, really through regeneration harvest of the plantations, is I think where we're headed. If we get to that third stage, we're not anywhere near there now. This is the Biscuit Fire. The Biscuit Fire was a seminal event, more than any way that it really changed post-fire policy fairly dramatically. And policy often changes before it's formally acknowledged. I think it happened here. I think in the future there will have to be a justification on why salvage instead of why not salvage. And to me, there's almost no question that the federal forest's most significant contribution to diverse early cereal ecosystems will come through these post-fire events, especially since it's easier for the federal government to be still than to take action. Okay? And so this is a very important role, and we haven't had to face many tests over the last decade. When we do, we will see a rapid solidification of policy that's very different than the past. However, we could, in fact, on the federal lands, try, in fact, to create, as Mark has just so eloquently talked about, create diverse these early cereal conditions. We're certainly not headed there now. This is a justly famous graph out of Baker et al. in 2006. And the purple declining is regeneration harvest. The taller bars, which are also a kind of purple, sorry about those two colors, they're thinning. And basically, accepting post-fire actions, the federal forestry agencies in the moist forests are in the process of going out of the forestry business. They have anywhere, depending on how you count it, from 15 to 25 years of thinning. And then harvest is going to fairly rapidly decline and stop unless we begin to regeneration harvest again. And that is going to be an uphill climb, I believe, any way you look at it. This calls for a demonstration. Are there any skeptics left? Well, I'll get to that in a minute. But this is going to call for a demonstration that we can create diverse early cereal. The question is, where and how would we harvest? What would be the effect on timber yield, I think, is a question, at least for some, at least the BLM, and should we plant at all? And let me just say that I've been on a quest to find a spot on the federal forests where we might all agree it'd be good to, in fact, harvest this stand along the lines of the way Mark was saying, a stand, not a watershed, to demonstrate this. Where would we go? Okay, Here is a chart we put together in a recent study by by Jerry Franklin and myself. And yeah, I guess you can see that. This is the age class structure outside wilderness and roadless areas in the moist forest under the Northwest Forest Plan. The deep blue is late successional reserves. The reddish purple is riparian reserves. Matrix is the green. Okay. Now, of course, we see that we're we have a lot of very old forest, 160 plus, and a lot of very young forest, and not too much in between. Well, I don't think we're going to be harvesting the very old, and under the Northwest Forest Plan, we see with the limits on lake succession and riparian reserve harvested about 80, we see what might be available for thinning. And here's what might be available for regeneration harvest. Not much. And so where do we start? Where do we start? Jerry Franklin and I talked in the 80 to about 140 range, perhaps harvesting there, and using the kind of retention strategy and allowing the forest to come back in and using those stands as demonstrations. And so we began to embark on talking to people about this. We felt that stands less than 60 years old really are too old to have the structural and composition complexity to really be a good demonstration. BLM, by the way, has even a little bit more extreme case here. Excuse me. In the case of BLM, we see that the blue is both late succession riparian reserves, the green is matrix again, and we see that that's really where they might do thinning, very strongly pushed to the young, and the regeneration harvest, very little over 70 to 80 years of age in the matrix. The scientists in the FEMAT were very good at picking out BLM old growth and putting it in the LSRs. Okay, so where would we go there? Well, we actually have tried to explore that. And look, this is just southwest of here, about 20 miles. It's south of Mary's Peak. And if you look in the upper right, the northeast corner, you see the matrix lands. The matrix is brown, and the light green is riparian reserves, the dark green is LSRs. So perhaps there we can try this out to demonstrate. Not only that, but look up in that northeast corner, there's a lot of blue, which is 60 to 80. Okay, maybe we go there. And we did. And by the way, I've turned the senior forest management class, their capstone, they're trying to analyze this issue. So there we're out in the forest, and there is the forest. There is that 80-year-old stand, and perhaps we can apply that strategy that Mark talked about there. And it has been harvested before. It was harvested with significant legacies and just let come back. So there we have an example. So maybe we can do that again. So what's been the reaction of people when we suggest this? People outside this room, I might add. Oh, and also, one point is that, the yields will come down compared to high-intensity management. The regeneration harvest would be maybe 70 to 80%, and long-term yield might be 30 to 60%. There's a lot of unknowns about long-term yield. The simulation models, I think, tend to overestimate the fall downs involved. But at any rate, there is an effect there. So so we might leave it, might leave more trees or less, might let the forest come back, nurture the early successional ecosystem. And so what's been the reaction when we take this around? Universal dismay. Okay? Now, why? Why are these people so angry? Well, when I talk to people, when I talk to members of environmental groups, they often are quite skeptical that, in fact, a regeneration harvest will have environmental benefits. Why? It's identified with clear cuts. For starters, if we're going to do this, we really do need a new language. We won't get off dead center. The federal agencies, when I talk to them, they say, oh, come on, Norm. What are you talking about? I mean by that, the regulatory agencies, U.S. Fish and Wildlife. Why are you talking about that? When I talk to the BLM, they're very worried about the fall down in yield. And the Forest Service is totally locked into a thinning strategy. So what Franklin and I encountered, we write op-eds and do other crazy things old professors do, is that we haven't found about a soul outside of the two wonderful person right here in the front row, and maybe Mark, that are real strong advocates of this idea. And in addition, then when you get to BLM lands and the stuff covered with red are the standalone of BLM, and you look at the intervening land, the regulatory agencies say, we got lots of clear cuts out there. Why do we need more regeneration harvest? Look at it all. Of course, it's all industrial harvest out there. So that it's not been a happy time. The general public, they've never heard of this issue. They've never heard of this. Actually, I do like that lion. They never heard of this. It's not on their radar screen. So, boy, there's a ways to go here on federal forests. There really is. For, in fact, the federal agencies to use their understanding of ecological processes and the benefits of certain types of harvest that create these diverse early soil ecosystems to get a hearing. There's a long way to go. But I've got my class out looking for that stand. I mean, you have to start somewhere. Also, we need some social support. I mean, yeah, there were tree sitters, but where are the shrub sitters? I mean, we need some social support here to get this going. And we desperately need a charismatic megafauna that needs attention. And, BLM, how many of you are familiar with the Western Oregon Plan Revision? The Western Oregon Plan Revision, did it go back to clear cutting? Yes, it did. Why did they do that? Knowing they'd be going into the teeth of a gale. I mean, they read the papers. They could not develop any linkage between threatened and endangered species on their lands and retention of legacy structures. They couldn't develop it. And thus they moved away from it. That will continue to be devilish until more evidence comes in about the importance of these systems. The third one is to stimulate large-scale disturbance through their generation harvested plantations. I know that, hey, Mark, a whole wilderness would be great. Not a wilderness, sorry. We're not going to the wilderness yet. A whole watershed. I like that. But, what we're really talking about is, can we piece together in the longer run, after we demonstrate the merits of this, to stimulate disturbances through managing those plantations. That's what's going to be available in the longer run. Okay, but as I said, the biggest contribution on federal lands comes to the post-disturbance management. These are our CLAM simulations. And this is the Coastal Landscape Analysis and Management Project that I think Tom Spies talked about. It probably seems like weeks ago, but it was only this morning. And this is our projection of regeneration harvest in the Coast Range. It's almost going to be entirely done in the future on private land. That's where it's going to be done. We might slightly modify it on federal, and there'll be a little on state. And how's it being done? This was just from 2 weeks ago. Yes, it's by and large a clear cut. Oregon has a very modest leave tree policy. You can leave it in the adjacent stand, and they don't really track what you leave, and it's just real flimsy. Okay, it is. And that post and aerial spraying of herbicides comes in, yes, absolutely. And there isn't much, you really speed that along, and almost all of the leaf trees are put down in the riparian areas, and occasional patches. So that's what we're starting with. How did we get there? Well, in Oregon, this has a very long history. Dean Peavy wrote a really seminal piece in 1929 in Oregon's commercial forests, and he said we really need to change an attitude, and we did then. The forest is a renewable resource. In the interest of the nation and the state, Oregon's forest should be renewed, and by all means, there should be as little delay as possible. And this is what Dean Peavy was trying to overcome. This is post-logging, and they walked away. This is the kind of stand that makes Mark Swanson's heart beat faster. This is the huckleberries can go on for a long time here. This is what we were trying to overcome at the time, and understandably so. And we developed reforestation rules aimed on getting that site covered with, if conifers came off it, conifers again real rapidly, so many per acre depending on site. And the real killer here, and Joan Hager talked about it, I think, this morning, was this free-to-grow requirement, which basically you have up to 2 years to complete your planning, and then by year 6, it has to be free to grow. Well, the net effect of that, which means, and here free to grow is defined right there, growing within it. Well, the net effect of that is that encourages aerial spraying of herbicides to deal with it. Not only does it knock back the shrubs, that really makes it difficult to leave legacy trees within the harvest unit. So, what can we do here? You know, where are we now? The threat of timber famine is greatly diminished. Problems of successful regeneration largely solved. The forest industry views wood as a renewable resource. So perhaps we can bring about change there. Well, where would we start? New regulations? I don't think so. We're not in a climate where regulations are too popular. Rather, the challenge here is to create more diverse early sterile forest while reducing the regulatory burden, increasing the choices people have. By increasing choices, just by doing that, you will create diversity. Removing the free-to-grow requirement, removing the regeneration requirement, this is all on private land, by the way, in its entirety, allowing substitution of an invasives eradication plan, an enhanced wildlife tree plan, or logging degree retention plan. In terms of bringing early successional forests in our lifetimes to really increasing them in Oregon, the two keys are post-disturbance management on federal land and modifying and limiting and reducing the regeneration requirements on private land. Allowing substitution of an invasives eradication plan. This is Scotch broom. At least around my neck of the woods, I know you just can't let it go. There's all sorts of invasives that show up. Debbie tracks home from her work that end up appearing in our little farm. And here's one now, false brome. You ever dealt with false brome? Man, it's the closest thing we have to a bionic weed. At any rate, and you've really got to deal with those. And herbicides will be part of it. But it would not require the kind of a broad-scale application we now have. In addition, the whole notion that a lot of these trees don't have value, don't have significant wood value, I should say. They have tremendous ecological value. And identifying those and helping landowners identify them. And Debbie, when she worked for the College Forest, tried to do that in a few timber sales, and I don't think she was asked to lay out any more. One of them's up in the upper right. Okay, to leave those trees. Again, if you're really contemplating aerial spraying or herbicides, it may be hard to do. But certainly to help landowners understand the relative values, ecological versus economic, in some of these trees will be a real important part of it. How people react to these ideas. It's that same picture. Yes, I have very good friends at ODF, and we have intense arguments about this. This will not come easy, this change. I think it's very important, but it won't come easy. So how are we going to proceed? This was an incredibly valuable technical discussion of early successional forests. But there's an incredible social part of this that's going to stymie progress, at least progress, I think, in your eyes, that we have to cope with. We need a social movement. And in fact, there's a recent social movement afoot that you may have seen on the TVs. We need a social movement. We need slogans. We need slogans. I'm going to put that first one on. I told Debbie, if I only had time, this inspiration only came to me last night, I would have made this into a bumper sticker to sell here today. And most importantly, we need intelligent, charismatic leaders like Tina Fey. And I suggest we bring her 2 years from now as our keynote speaker. Thank you. Do you want me to step here?
Would anybody care to question Dr. Johnson? Would anyone like to propose a slogan to Dr. Johnson? Well, then let's think him. What?
Don't shade me out.
There you go.
Beyond the norm.
You have a future in front of you, young man.
I have a question. One of the challenges that you all faced in the Northwest Forest Plan was adaptive management areas, and then the rigorous review, and somehow we've never been able to come up with a rigorous process for reviewing what works and what doesn't, that the public has confidence in. And we go back to the courts and we get trapped in litigation. So is there any way besides slogans that we can move forward and have some kind of reasonable review?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because it is the missing link here. You know, just the other day, just yesterday in my class, my co-teacher was presenting, who do people have faith in? And it is these folks that can give these independent reviews, often scientists. And in terms of seeking to demonstrate the benefits of early successional forests, without that independent review, we're not going to get very far. I agree entirely. And in fact, Jerry Franklin, wherever we talk now, including before Senator Wyden in this bill, says this is fundamental to making progress. It's not enough. You need a social movement, too. But it's absolutely fundamental, I agree. And I've been stymied in making much progress there. Why? It's human nature not to want independent review actions. I mean, what do we need these class evaluations for? In my teaching, I know it's great. You know, you don't, and so it's real hard to maintain. But I agree, Stan, it's absolutely fundamental.
Thanks.
There is one question.
One quick question here. If we were to implement the Northwest Forest Plan to its what it was intended for, would we be in this situation?
Oh, I should have stopped. Okay. The Northwest Forest Plan was the last scientist plan. It was adopted with pretty much a tin ear on what was socially acceptable. As we learn more about that, as we learn the overwhelming public dislike in cities and in rural communities for cutting old trees, we realized, and it really couldn't be implemented as it had been proposed. If in fact it had been implemented as proposed, it would have torn the Forest Service and the BLM apart. They've evolved into an incredibly impressive set of agencies in the field. And it would sure be a shame if that doesn't continue. The reason why Jerry Franklin and I really are going to fight for the actually undertaking harvest to create diverse early successional ecosystem conditions isn't for timber supply. It's because we need the professionals and those agencies out in those forests. And without that action, we feel without that sort of action, we feel it just wither away. So in the end, the Northwest Forest Plan wasn't possible to implement as designed. And I do have to admire how the agencies have tried to tilt into the wind to do what they can. Thank you.